Blood under fingernails doesn't wash out with just soap. You need a stiff bristle brush and scalding water. Vincent knew this, staring at his bruised knuckles in a fluorescent-lit diner at 3 in the morning. He just wanted a black coffee and 10 minutes of silence. What he got was a slip of receipt paper tucked under his mug. 9 scratched words from a waitress with a black eye. The man in booth 4 is going to shoot. The neon sign in the window hummed with a defective insect-like buzz. It flashed a sickly pink open against the rain-slicked asphalt of 9th Avenue, casting a bruised glow over the diner's interior. Vincent sat in a corner booth. The red vinyl seat was split down the middle, patched with a strip of duct tape that snagged against his wool trousers. He was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. A deep, marrow-deep exhaustion that tasted like copper and old coffee. The diner smelled of burnt grease industrial bleach and the damp wool of the drunks sleeping it off at the counter. It was exactly the kind of place where a man like Vincent wasn't supposed to be. But the high-end steakhouses and the private clubs felt suffocating tonight. He needed the anonymity of cheap linoleum and bad food. A waitress approached. She didn't have the practiced, overly bright smile of the uptown staff. She walked with a slight limp, carrying a ceramic mug and a glass pot of decaf that looked like motor oil. Her name tag, pinned crookedly to a faded yellow uniform, read, Tessa. Vincent didn't look at her face at first. He looked at her hands. The cuticles were chewed raw. A faded blue ink stain marked the side of her left index finger. When she set the mug down, the ceramic clanked too hard against the formica table. You want anything else, or just the sludge? Her voice was flat, gravelly from too many cigarettes, or too little sleep. Vincent finally looked up. She was young, maybe late 20s, but the city had worn the youth off her edges. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, stray strands sticking to the sweat on her neck. Her left eye was swollen, a blossoming tapestry of purple and yellow creeping down toward her cheekbone. She caught him looking at it, and her jaw tightened. She didn't look away. Most people looked away when Vincent stared. Just the coffee, he said. His voice was a low rumble. Suit yourself. She reached into her apron, pulled out a folded green receipt, and slid it under the edge of his saucer. She didn't linger. She turned on her rubber-soled shoes, the squeak echoing in the near-empty room, and walked back behind the counter to aggressively scrub a coffee stain. Vincent frowned. He didn't ask for the check. He hadn't even taken a sip. He pulled the mug toward him, sliding the damp paper out. The ink was cheap bleeding slightly where a drop of condensation had hit it. He unfolded it. The man in booth 4 is going to shoot. The words didn't register as panic. Vincent's pulse didn't spike. Instead, a cold, heavy stone of clarity settled in his stomach. The weariness evaporated, replaced by the hyper-focused hum of survival. He didn't turn his head. He didn't flinch. He slowly lifted the mug to his lips, letting the scalding, bitter coffee burn his tongue. Over the rim of the cup, he shifted his eyes to the chrome napkin dispenser, sitting in the center of his table. The curved metal offered a distorted funhouse reflection of the diner behind him. Booth 4. 2 tables down near the restrooms. A man in a dark windbreaker was sitting alone. No food in front of him, just a glass of water. The man's right hand was under the table. His shoulders were tense, angled toward Vincent's back. Vincent took another sip. He mentally mapped the room. The exits, the front door with its annoying bell, the swinging metal doors leading to the kitchen, the narrow hallway by booth 4 leading to the bathrooms, and presumably a back alley door. Why did the waitress warn him? Was it a trap? A setup to make him move into a choke point? He glanced back at Tessa. She was still scrubbing the counter, but her knuckles were white and her eyes kept darting toward the chrome reflection of the pie case watching booth 4. She was terrified. Not of Vincent. Of the windbreaker. Vincent put the mug down. The clink sounded deafening to his own ears. He reached into his coat pocket, feeling the cold, textured grip of his Sig Sauer. He didn't draw it. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled $50 bill and tossed it on the table. He stood up. The vinyl groaned. In the reflection of the napkin dispenser, the man in booth 4 shifted his arm, moving upward. Vincent didn't walk toward the front door. He turned sharply, stepping directly into the narrow aisle, closing the distance between himself and booth 4 in 3 long, silent strides. The hitman hadn't expected the target to walk toward him. It broke his loop. For a fraction of a second, the man in the windbreaker froze, his hand snagging on the edge of the table as he tried to clear the heavy barrel of a suppressed pistol from beneath the Formica. That fraction of a second was all Vincent needed. He didn't draw his own weapon. Too messy, too loud even with the sparse crowd. Instead, Vincent slammed his left hand down on the hitman's wrist, pinning it hard against the table. The bone crunched under the sudden weight. The man hissed, eyes going wide, and tried to stand, throwing a wild left hook. Vincent ducked the swing, tasting the stale sweat and cheap cologne of the man. He drove his right elbow in a brutal upward arc, connecting solidly with the man's jaw. The sound was a wet, heavy crack. The hitman's eyes rolled back, his body going slack as he slumped over the table, the suppressed pistol clattering harmlessly to the floor. Silence rushed back into the diner, save for the buzzing neon sign. A drunk at the counter snored on, oblivious. Vincent didn't pause. He grabbed the hitman by the collar of his windbreaker, hauling his dead weight up. "Come on, pal. You've had too much," Vincent said loudly for the benefit of the short-order cook, poking his head out from the kitchen window. Vincent dragged the man down the short hallway, kicking the pistol under a nearby radiator as he passed. He pushed through the heavy fire door at the end of the hall, spilling out into the cold, rain-swept alley behind the diner. The air smelled of rotting garbage and wet brick. The rain was a fine, freezing mist. Vincent let the hitman drop to the wet asphalt like a sack of concrete. He crouched quickly, patting the man down. No ID, a burner phone, a spare magazine. Professional but cheap. Someone had hired a local ghost, not a syndicate, heavy. The heavy metal door behind him squeaked open. Vincent spun his hand, flying to the gun in his coat. Tessa stood in the doorway. She was shivering, the thin yellow fabric of her uniform offering zero protection against the damp chill. She held a lit cigarette between two trembling fingers. The cherry glowed bright orange in the gloom. She looked at the unconscious man on the ground, then up at Vincent's hand inside his coat. Her flat, muddy brown eyes didn't widen. She took a slow drag of the cigarette and exhaled a thin plume of smoke into the rain. "You didn't kill him," she said. Her voice was steady, though her hands weren't. "Not yet," Vincent said, pulling his hand away from his weapon. He stepped closer to her. He towered over her, casting a shadow that swallowed her small frame. "How did you know? He's been sitting there for an hour." Nursing tap water. He kept checking the reflection in the window, waiting for you to walk in. When you sat down, he took the safety off. I heard the click. I know what a gun sounds like. Vincent stared at her. The bruising around her eye looked worse in the harsh security light above the door. It was a recent hit. Fresh. "You stuck your neck out for a stranger. In my experience, people don't do that unless they want to die or they want a payout." Tessa flicked the ash from her cigarette. It sizzled as it hit a puddle. "I don't want to die." "Then how much?" She looked up at him. There was a desperate feral energy simmering just beneath her exhausted exterior. "I don't want your money. Everyone wants money. I want out." Vincent narrowed his eyes. The rain was beginning to soak through his expensive wool suit, plastering his shirt to his back. It was deeply uncomfortable. Out of what? Queens. The city. My shift. She gestured vaguely with the cigarette. I saved your life, or at least saved you from taking a bullet to the shoulder. I know who you are, Mr. Corbo. Vincent went perfectly still. The ambient noise of the city, the distant sirens, the hiss of tires on wet pavement seemed to fade. He closed the distance between them in half a step, crowding her against the damp brick wall. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a physical weight. He smelled the vanilla soap she used, mixed with the sharp tang of cheap tobacco and fear sweat. If you know who I am, Vincent said, his voice dropping to a whisper that barely cut through the rain, then you know you shouldn't be saying that name out loud. She tipped her chin up. She was terrified. He could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of her throat, but she didn't shrink back. I used to work coat check at the Velvet Room. I saw you there twice. I know you run the ports. I know you have the resources to make people disappear. You want me to kill whoever gave you that black eye. It wasn't a question. No. A harsh, bitter laugh scraped her throat. He's already dead. I did that myself about 2 hours ago. He's bleeding out on the linoleum in my kitchen right now. Vincent stopped. He actually stopped breathing for a second. He looked at this scrawny, bruised waitress in a stained yellow dress. He looked at her chewed cuticles and the slight tremor in her hands. The guy in your kitchen, Vincent started slowly. Who is he? His name was Tommy. He ran numbers for the Vitiello family. And if I stay in this city another hour, the Vitiellos are going to peel my skin off. She took a final deep drag of the cigarette and flicked the butt into the alley. I gave you a warning. I gave you an edge. Now you owe me a ride. The interior of Vincent's black sedan was a sensory shock after the freezing alley. It smelled of rich, unblemished leather, expensive cedarwood cologne, and the faint, metallic, underlying scent of gun oil. It was quiet. The heavy doors slammed shut with a solid, airtight thud, cutting off the wail of police sirens that had begun to circle the neighborhood. Tessa sat in the passenger seat, rigid. She kept her hands clamped between her knees to stop them from shaking. She was dripping wet, ruining the upholstery, but Vincent didn't care. He started the engine, the V8 purring to life, with a deep, smooth vibration, and pulled out of the alley, merging seamlessly into the sparse late-night traffic. He drove with one hand on the wheel. The other rested on his thigh, inches from the weapon in his belt. He was taking a massive risk. Rule 1 of his life was compartmentalization. You don't bring strays into the car. You don't owe favors to ghosts. But the Vitiello family was a problem. They were his rivals, aggressive and expanding. If this waitress had actually killed one of their runners, she was a walking liability, or a weapon, depending on how he used her. Tommy, Vincent said, not looking at her. He watched the red taillights of a cab blurring in the rain. Tommy fingers Rossi. Tessa let out a shaky breath. I just knew him as Tommy, kept his money in a shoebox, kept his temper in a bottle. How did it happen? Why does it matter? She snapped, suddenly defensive. She turned to look at him, her wet hair clinging to her cheek. I defended myself. He had a heavy hand. Tonight I had a heavy frying pan. It was cast iron. He went down, hit his head on the corner of the radiator. Lots of blood. It wasn't planned. It matters. Vincent said, his tone utterly devoid of judgment. He spoke as if discussing a logistics problem at the docks. Because if it was an accident, they'll just kill you. If it was a hit, they'll torture you first to find out who paid you. The Vitiellos aren't known for their nuanced investigations. Tessa leaned her head back against the leather headrest, closing her eyes. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hollowed out and fragile. Under the warm air of the car's heater, The smell of cheap diner grease was fading, replaced by the damp wool of her cardigan. "I just needed to buy time," she whispered. "I went to work because I didn't know what else to do. I figured a public place was safer than sitting in the apartment with a corpse. Then you walked in. I recognized you. I saw the guy in the booth. It felt like, I don't know, like a slot machine paying out." Vincent glanced at her. Her skin was incredibly pale, the bruising around her eye standing out in stark, violent contrast. There was a smear of dried blood near her hairline that he hadn't noticed in the dark. Not hers, he guessed. "You have a passport?" he asked. "It's in the apartment, with the body." Vincent swore softly in Italian. "Of course it is." He whipped the steering wheel hard to the right, taking a sudden turn down a narrow, badly lit side street in Brooklyn. The tires hissed against the flooded pavement. Tessa bolted upright, gripping to the door handle. "Where are we going? My place is the other way." "We're not going to your place. Your place is a crime scene," Vincent said, his eyes scanning the mirrors. A dark SUV had turned down the street 2 blocks back. It could be coincidence. In Vincent's world, coincidence was usually fatal. If Tommy missed a check-in, the Vitiellos will already be looking for him. If they find him dead, they'll lock down your building. "But my passport, my money. I can get you new paper, I can get you cash." Vincent cut her off, his voice hard, leaving no room for argument. "But right now, I need to know if you were followed to the diner." "Followed, no. I took the subway." Look in your side mirror," Vincent ordered. Tessa blinked, turning her head. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw the twin headlights of the dark SUV. It was matching their speed, keeping a steady 2-block distance. "Is that—" Her voice caught. Maybe just a guy trying to get home." Vincent pressed his foot down on the accelerator. The heavy sedan surged forward, pressing them back into the seats. He took the next left entirely too fast, the rear tires breaking traction for a nauseating second before gripping the asphalt again. He glanced in the rearview mirror. 10 seconds later, the SUV made the same turn, accelerating to catch up. "Not a guy trying to get home," Vincent muttered. "They know." Tessa breathed panic, finally breaking through her stoic facade. She shrank back into the seat, looking small and fragile. They found him. They found Tommy. Maybe. Or maybe they followed the guy from booth 4 and realized I didn't die, Vincent said. He felt the familiar cold burn of adrenaline flooding his system. It was comfortable. It was what he knew. He reached over his large, calloused hand, brushing against Tessa's trembling knee as he popped open the glove compartment. The interior light illuminated a sleek, compact Glock 19 and 2 spare magazines. "Take it," Vincent said. Tessa stared at the gun like it was a live rattlesnake. "I don't know how to shoot that." "You know what a gun sounds like," Vincent replied, quoting her earlier words. His eyes were locked on the road ahead, navigating the labyrinth of Brooklyn side streets. "You point the heavy end at the people trying to kill us and you pull the trigger. It's exactly like a frying pan, just faster." Tessa swallowed hard. She reached out her fingers, wrapping around the cold, stippled grip. It was heavier than she expected. It smelled like oil and burnt cordite. "You owe me," Vincent said, whipping the car into an abandoned industrial park near the waterfront. "You got me out of a jam. Now I'm getting you out of one. But from this second forward, you do exactly what I tell you. Understand?" Tessa looked from the gun in her lap to the hard, unyielding profile of the Mafia boss beside her. He wasn't a savior. He was a monster who happened to be driving the getaway car. But as the dark SUV tore into the industrial park behind them, headlights blinding in the rearview mirror, she realized he was the only monster she had. "I understand," she said. The industrial park was a graveyard of shipping containers and rusted machinery bordered by the churning black water of the East River. The rain was coming down in sheets, now a torrential downpour that turned the potholed asphalt into a shallow lake. Vincent killed the headlights. The heavy sedan plunged into total darkness, navigating purely by the pale ambient glow of the city reflecting off the low clouds. Tessa let out a short, stifled gasp, her hands gripping the edges of her seat. The Glock slid off her lap, thudding heavily onto the floorboard. "Leave it," Vincent commanded. His voice was a low hum, tight with concentration. He didn't look at her. His eyes were wide, adjusting to the sudden absence of light, tracking the shadows of corrugated steel walls rushing past them. Behind them, the SUV's high beams cut through the rain like twin searchlights, sweeping violently across the wet concrete as it took the corner. They had the horsepower, but Vincent had the layout. This was his territory. He owned the land under these rusting husks, holding it in a shell corporation for a development deal that had stalled a decade ago. "Hold on to something," Vincent said. Before Tessa could reach for the overhead handle, Vincent slammed the brakes and wrenched the steering wheel left. The sedan skidded, the rear end fishtailing wildly on the hydroplaned surface. The tires shrieked a high mechanical scream that vibrated in Tessa's teeth. The car swung perfectly into a narrow gap between two towering stacks of shipping containers, the side mirrors missing the corrugated steel by mere inches. Vincent threw it into park and killed the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy, broken only by the frantic drumming of rain on the roof and Tessa's ragged breathing. Through the rear window, the headlights of the SUV flashed past their hiding spot. The squeal of heavy brakes echoed over the rain as the pursuers realized they'd lost their target. "Quiet," Vincent breathed. Tessa pressed her hand over her mouth. She tasted salt and stale coffee. Her chest was heaving. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was turning toxic, making her limbs feel like lead. The interior of the car was fogging up from their body heat, trapping the smell of wet wool and Vincent's sharp cedar cologne. Outside, a heavy door slammed, then another. Footsteps splashed through the deep puddles, spread out. They couldn't have gone far. The voice was muffled by the rain, but the harsh, nasal Queen's accent cut through. Vincent reached down smoothly, retrieving the fallen Glock from the floorboard. He checked the chamber, by feel a soft and metallic click in the dark, and pressed it back into Tessa's trembling hand. "Keep your finger off the trigger until you see a face you don't like," he whispered, his breath warm against her temple. The proximity made her shiver. "Stay down," he opened his door. The interior light had been disabled, a paranoid habit that now saved their lives. He slipped out into the freezing rain without a sound, the heavy door clicking shut with barely a whisper. Tessa was alone. The dark pressed in on her. The rain hammered the windshield, distorting the shadows outside into monstrous shapes. She huddled low in the passenger seat, the cold metal of the gun digging into her thigh. Every splash, every groan of the wind against the containers sounded like a footstep. Pop, pop. The gunshots were suppressed, sounding like a nail gun firing into wet wood. They came from her left. Someone screamed, a wet, gurgling sound that was abruptly cut short. Tessa squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of Tommy on her kitchen floor, the dark pool of blood expanding across the cheap linoleum, seeping into the grout. The metallic smell of it. The way his eyes had rolled back. A wave of nausea hit her so hard, she gagged, clamping her free hand over her mouth to keep the sound in. A heavy body slammed against the trunk of the sedan. Tessa jumped her head, cracking against the passenger window. She gasped, bringing the gun up with both hands, pointing it blindly at the rear glass. A shadow loomed over the trunk lid. A hand slapped against the rear windshield, smearing blood mixed with rain across the glass. It was a man in a tactical vest. He wasn't looking inside. He was leaning on the car, choking, clutching his throat. A second later, a figure emerged from the rain behind him. Vincent. He didn't use a gun. He hooked his arm around the man's neck and wrenched backward with brutal, mechanical efficiency. There was a dull snap, barely audible over the storm. The man went limp. Vincent let him drop into the muddy water beneath the bumper. Vincent walked around to the driver's side, his suit plastered to his body, his face an unreadable mask of wet angles. He opened the door and slid in. He smelled like rain ozone and fresh blood. "Two down," Vincent said, wiping his wet hands on his ruined trousers. There was a third driver. He took off in the SUV when the second guy dropped. We have maybe 20 minutes before he comes back with half the Vitiello payroll. He started the engine. It turned over with a deep growl. "Did you?" Tessa's voice was a dry croak. She pointed vaguely toward the back of the car. "I handled it," Vincent said flatly. "Put the gun away, Tessa. You're pointing it at the dashboard. If you fire, the bullet will ricochet off the block and hit one of us in the knee." She clumsily lowered the weapon, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it again. Vincent put the car in gear and eased out of the gap. "We're dumping the car. It's a beacon. We walk from here." The walk was a 3-block march through industrial desolation. The cold soaked through Tessa's thin yellow uniform and cheap cardigan in seconds, settling deep into her marrow. Her rubber-soled work shoes, meant for gripping greasy diner floors, were useless against the flooded, debris-strewn pavement. She stumbled twice. Vincent didn't offer his hand. He just slowed his pace, walking slightly behind her, his eyes constantly scanning the dark alleys and rooftops. They reached an old brick warehouse at the edge of the water. The faded painted letters on the brick read, "Corbo Marine Freight," half obscured by years of grime and creeping ivy. Vincent bypassed the heavy rolling doors. He guided her toward a small rusted side entrance. He produced a brass key from his pocket, the metal scraping harshly as it fought the neglected lock. With a hard shove of his shoulder, the door gave way, groaning on rusted hinges. The air inside was stagnant. It smelled of motor oil, dry rot, and the dusty metallic scent of old tools. It was freezing, but at least it was dry. Vincent locked the door behind them, throwing a heavy deadbolt and dropping a thick steel bar across the frame. He navigated the pitch-black room from memory, his heavy footsteps echoing off high ceilings. A moment later, the harsh yellow glare of a caged work light flared to life, casting long, sharp shadows across the room. It was a makeshift office built onto the warehouse floor. A battered metal desk, a rusted filing cabinet, and a sagging leather sofa covered in dust. "Sit," Vincent ordered. Tessa didn't argue. She collapsed onto the sofa. A cloud of dust plumed upward, catching in the yellow light. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around herself. Her teeth were chattering violently, a rapid clicking sound that she couldn't control. Vincent shed his ruined suit jacket, tossing it over the back of a metal folding chair. His white dress shirt was soaked, clinging to the heavy musculature of his back and shoulders. He didn't seem to feel the cold. He moved with a restless, coiled energy, opening desk drawers, tossing aside old paperwork. He found what he was looking for, a dusty first aid kit and a half-empty bottle of generic amber whiskey. He walked over to the sofa, unscrewing the cap of the whiskey. He didn't offer a glass. He just held the bottle out to her. Tessa stared at it. "I don't drink." "You do tonight," Vincent said. It wasn't a suggestion. "Your core temperature is dropping. Drink it before you go into shock, because I don't have the time or the blankets to thaw you out." She took the bottle with trembling fingers. The glass was cold. She brought it to her lips and took a pull. The cheap liquor burned like battery acid all the way down to her stomach, making her cough harshly, but a slow, heavy warmth began to bloom in her chest. Vincent watched her. Under the harsh work light, she looked wrecked. The bruise around her eye was a mottled, ugly purple, the skin swollen tight. Her lips were blue. Yet she hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed when the bodies dropped. There was a hard, stubborn kernel inside this diner waitress that intrigued him. He pulled a wooden chair opposite her and sat down, opening the first aid kit. It smelled sharply of iodine and old adhesive. "Let me see your face," he said. Tessa flinched back, her grip tightening on the bottle. "It's fine. Tommy hit me a few hours ago. It's done swelling. I'm not talking about the bruise." Vincent pointed to her hairline. "You're bleeding." Tessa reached up her fingers, brushing her temple. They came away sticky and red. In the chaos of the car crash, she hadn't even felt the glass nick her. Vincent leaned forward. He poured a splash of iodine onto a square of gauze. "Hold still, it's going to sting." He didn't wait for permission. He reached out his large, calloused hand, gently cupping the side of her jaw to hold her head steady. His touch was jarringly warm. His thumb rested just below her bruised cheekbone, careful not to press the tender flesh. Tessa froze. The sheer physical presence of him was overwhelming. He smelled of rain sweat and gunpowder. Up close, she saw the harsh lines of his face, the tiny silver scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the dark, fathomless brown of his eyes. He wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature that dealt in death, and he was currently cleaning a scratch on her forehead with the precision of a watchmaker. The iodine burned sharply. Tessa sucked in a breath through her teeth. "Breathe," Vincent murmured, his focus entirely on the small cut. "You're holding your breath again. People do that when they panic. It starves the brain, makes you stupid. Breathe." She exhaled shakily. You killed those men outside, with your bare hands." Vincent didn't pause. He wiped the dried blood away. "Yes." "Does it bother you?" Vincent stopped. He pulled the gauze away and looked her in the eyes. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no posturing. Just a flat, cold truth. "No. They took a contract. They knew the risks of the job. They failed." He tossed the bloody gauze onto the floor. "The man on your kitchen floor, does he bother you?" Tessa looked away, staring at the scuffed toes of her shoes. The whiskey was settling, dulling the sharp edges of her terror, leaving behind a profound, heavy exhaustion. "He was going to kill me," she whispered. "He found out I was skimming. Just a little. 100 here, 50 there. I was saving up to leave, to get a bus ticket out west, somewhere where it doesn't rain all the time." He found the envelope. She swallowed hard, her throat clicking. "He hit me. I fell against the stove. He kept screaming, reaching into his jacket. I knew he had a knife. I grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the sink. I swung it as hard as I could. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to stop hitting me." She finally looked back up at Vincent. Her brown eyes were rimmed with red, entirely stripped of pretense. "I've never killed anything before, not even a spider. And now it feels like I can't wash the smell of him off my hands." Vincent stared at her. He understood that smell. It was the smell of crossing a line you could never step back over. He didn't offer her hollow comfort. He didn't tell her it would be okay, because it wouldn't. "You survived," Vincent said simply. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "That's the only metric that matters right now. Guilt is a luxury for people who aren't being hunted." Vincent stood up, leaving the first aid kit open on the desk. He walked to the window, peering through a crack in the painted glass, out into the dark, rain-swept yard. He reached into the inner pocket of his soaked trousers and pulled out a heavy, blocky burner phone. It was waterproof, indestructible, and entirely untraceable. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "Yeah." The voice on the other end was gravelly, thick with sleep. "Darian." "It's me," Vincent said, keeping his voice low, though the warehouse was empty. "We have a problem. A massive one." The sleep instantly vanished from Darian's voice. "Where are you? I'll send a car." "No, we're compromised. I got hit at the diner on 9th. Professional ghost, but sloppy. Then followed by a Vitiello crew in an SUV. I took out 2 in the old rail yard, but 1 got away." A heavy silence hummed on the line. "The Vitiellos, Vince, they wouldn't hit you directly. Not unless they wanted an all-out war in the streets. Carmine Vitiello doesn't have the stomach for that kind of heat from the feds." "Maybe Carmine didn't order it," Vincent said, watching a rat scurry along the far wall. "Or maybe he found a reason to get brave. Run a check on Tommy Rossi, one of their mid-level street runners. Find out what his usual route is, who his direct capo is. I need everything you have on him in the next 10 minutes. Rossi, the guy with the bad temper. Why? Because he's dead," Vincent said. He glanced back at Tessa. She was sitting perfectly still, listening. "And someone knows about it." Vincent hung up. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and turned to face Tessa. She was still clutching the whiskey bottle, but she looked more present now. The blue tint had left her lips. "Tommy was just a runner," Vincent said, pacing slowly in front of the desk. "A bag man. He picks up envelopes from bookies and drop houses and delivers them to the boss. The Vitiellos wouldn't start a war over a dead bagman. They'd just replace him. Unless—" Vincent stopped pacing. He looked at Tessa, his dark eyes narrowing, calculating. Unless Tommy had something on him when he died. Something important enough that they sent a hit squad after the last person to see him alive. Tessa blinked. She set the whiskey bottle down on the metal desk with a soft clink. "You said you were skimming," Vincent said, taking a step toward her. The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly dense. "You said he kept his money in a shoebox. A runner doesn't keep his collections in a shoebox. He delivers them." "He kept his side hustle in a shoebox," Tessa corrected her voice, steadying. "He was running his own loan sharking operation on the side, unsanctioned. That's why he was so paranoid." Vincent nodded slowly. "Okay. So you took his side money. That's a few grand. Not enough to launch an assassination attempt on a rival boss." He leaned over the desk, invading her space, forcing her to look up at him. "What else was in the apartment, Tessa? What aren't you telling me?" Tessa met his gaze. The fear was still there, but it was buried under a hardening layer of pragmatic survival. She realized in that moment the currency she held. Vincent Corbeau didn't save people out of the goodness of his heart. He was evaluating her usefulness. If she had nothing else to offer, she was a liability. And liabilities were left in abandoned warehouses. She reached her hand into the deep, stretched pocket of her yellow diner cardigan. Her fingers brushed past a handful of crumpled receipts and the cold brass of her house keys. She pulled out a small black leather moleskin notebook. The edges were worn, the leather stained with a dark, dried substance that looked terribly like blood. Vincent stared at it. "What is that?" "You asked what else was in the shoebox," Tessa said softly. She didn't hand it to him. She kept it flat against her thigh. Tommy wasn't a smart man, but he was greedy, and he liked to keep records. Vincent's jaw tightened. "Records of what?" "Everything," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a bomb in the quiet room. Names, dates, payouts, bribes to precinct captains, Port Authority kickbacks. Every dime he ever delivered for the Vitiello family he wrote down. He told me once it was his insurance policy, in case they ever tried to screw him over. Vincent felt a cold, sharp jolt of electricity shoot down his spine. It wasn't fear. It was sheer, unadulterated opportunity. A ledger like that wasn't just evidence. It was the blueprint to the Vitiello empire. With that book, Vincent could dismantle their entire operation, sever their political ties, and absorb their territory without firing a single shot. You didn't just kill a man, Tessa, Vincent said, his voice dropping an octave. The cynical Mafia boss was staring at the bruised Waitress like she had just handed him the Holy Grail. You robbed the Vitiello family of their structural integrity. Tessa finally held the book out. Her hand wasn't shaking anymore. I told you, I want out of this city. I need new idea-clean car and enough cash to disappear. Vincent didn't take the book immediately. He looked from the black leather to her face. She was negotiating, sitting in a freezing warehouse covered in someone else's blood, being hunted by half the city. She was leveraging the boss of the Corbo family. A slow, dark smile touched the corner of Vincent's mouth. It was a terrifying expression. You're not going anywhere, Tessa, Vincent said softly. He reached out his large hand, wrapping around the small notebook, his fingers brushing against hers. You hold the key to a war, and until the Vitiellos are burning to the ground, you belong to me. Vincent's declaration hung in the stagnant air of the warehouse, heavy as wet concrete. You belong to me. Tessa didn't flinch. She didn't shrink back against the sagging leather of the sofa. The shock of the night had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard crust of absolute pragmatism. She looked at his hand, massive and calloused, wrapping around the small, blood-stained notebook. That little book was the sum total of her leverage, her only ticket out of a shallow grave in the Pine Barrens, and he had just smoothly confiscated it. I belong to myself, Tessa said. Her voice was entirely devoid of the tremble it had carried 10 minutes ago. It was flat, carrying the exhausted resignation of someone who had worked double shifts her whole life. The book is yours. The war is yours. I want a flight out of JFK to Seattle. Vincent didn't laugh, but a dark amusement flickered deep in his eyes. It was a terrifying thing to witness that brief softening of a murderer's face. He stepped back from her, retreating into the harsh yellow pool of the work light. He opened the notebook. The spine cracked a dry, protesting sound. Seattle, he murmured, his eyes scanning the first page. The handwriting was jagged, erratic. It rains a lot in Seattle. I like the rain. You say that now while you're soaked to the bone and shivering, Vincent replied, not looking up. He turned a page. His thumb brushed over a smear of dried brown blood. Tommy Rossi was an idiot, but he was meticulous. I'll give him that. He's got drop points in here I didn't even know existed. A meatpacking plant in Hunts Point, a dry cleaner in Astoria. He snapped the book shut. The sound was sharp as a gunshot. You don't get it, Tessa, Vincent said. The amusement was gone. His tone shifted back to the cold, calculating frequency of a man who measured lives in columns of profit and loss. You didn't just find a bag of cash. You found the architectural blueprints to Carmine Vitiello's entire house. If Carmine realizes Tommy is dead and realizes this book is missing, he won't just look for you. He will tear this city down to the bedrock to find you. Then hide me, she demanded. I intend to, but not in Seattle. Vincent pulled his burner phone from his pocket again. You're going to stay exactly where I put you, because if you step out of line, if you try to run before I've verified every single name and number in this ledger, I won't have to kill you. The Vitiellos will do it for me, and they will make it last a very, very long time. Tessa swallowed. The mechanical hum of the warehouse's ancient electrical box suddenly seemed deafening. The iodine on her forehead was drying, pulling the skin tight. She felt the grime of the diner, the sweat of the alley, and the metallic taint of Tommy's blood baking into her skin. Vincent dialed a number. He didn't turn away from her as he spoke. "Darian, I need a clean car at the Corbeau Freight Yard. 10 minutes. Bring a change of clothes. Women's. Small." He paused, listening to the static on the other end. "No. No hospitals? Just get the car here." He hung up and tossed the phone onto the rusted metal desk. He picked up his ruined, soaking wetsuit jacket from the folding chair and pulled a silver lighter and a crushed pack of cigarettes from the inside pocket. They were dry. He lit one, taking a slow drag. The sharp, acrid smell of tobacco filled the small office, masking the dust and the motor oil. He didn't offer her one. "Who did Tommy answer to directly?" Vincent asked, the cigarette bobbing between his lips. Tessa leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes. The fatigue was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. "A guy named Sal. They called him Sal the Butcher. I only saw him once. Short guy. Wears too much cologne. Smells like cheap peppermint and stale cigar smoke." Vincent nodded slowly. "Salvatore Maranzano. A capo. He runs the Bronx docks for Carmine. If Tommy missed his drop tonight, Sal is the one who sent the ghost to the diner. So Sal knows I'm alive. Sal knows a woman walked out of the diner with a man he tried to kill," Vincent corrected. "He doesn't know who you are yet. The ghost is dead in the alley. The 2 guys in the rail yard are dead. The driver who got away only saw the back of my car." Tessa opened her eyes. She looked at the man standing a few feet away. He was a killer. He was the head of a massive, violent syndicate. And yet, sitting in this freezing, filthy room, he was the only thing standing between her and a horrific death. It was a sickening, twisted kind of safety. "Why didn't you kill me?" she asked. The question slipped out before she could stop it. "When I gave you the book, you could have just taken it and snapped my neck." Tied up the loose end, Vincent took the cigarette out of his mouth. He looked at her through the haze of blue smoke. He studied the raw, chewed cuticles on her hands. He looked at the brutal bruising around her eye. He looked at the way she held her jaw locked tight, refusing to shatter. "Because," Vincent said softly, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the quiet room, "I don't break tools that are still useful. And you, Tessa, are turning out to be very useful." 30 minutes later, the heavy metal door of the warehouse groaned open. A man stepped inside, silhouetted by the pale, rain-slicked streetlights outside. He was tall, heavily built, wearing a dark raincoat. "Vince!" the man called out. His voice was the same gravelly baritone Tessa had heard over the phone. "Darian." Vincent walked out of the office, stepping into the cavernous dark of the warehouse floor. "Car secure. Parked out back. No plates. Untraceable," Darian said. He tossed a black duffel bag onto the hood of a rusted forklift. "Got the clothes. What the hell happened out there? The scanner is going crazy. Cops found 2 bodies in the old rail yard and a dead guy in an alley off 9th. "We had a busy night," Vincent said. He gestured back toward the office. "We're moving." Darian stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of Tessa sitting on the sofa. He looked from her bruised face to Vincent, a silent question passing between them. Darian didn't ask. In their world, you only asked the questions you were prepared to hear the answers to. "Take the bag," Vincent told Tessa. "Change in the bathroom down the hall. 2 minutes. We don't linger." Tessa grabbed the heavy canvas bag. She walked down a short, dark corridor to a bathroom that smelled intensely of bleach and old rust. There was no mirror. The sink was stained brown with hard water. She stripped off the yellow diner uniform, It felt heavy, saturated with sweat and fear. She dropped it directly into a rusted metal trash can. Inside the bag was a pair of dark denim jeans, a black long-sleeved turtleneck, and a pair of generic black sneakers. They fit reasonably well, though the shoes were a half size too big. They were utterly anonymous clothes. The clothes of a ghost. When she walked back out, Vincent was waiting by the exit. He had abandoned his ruined suit jacket and was wearing a dark windbreaker Darian had brought. He looked less like a businessman now, and more like a soldier. "Let's go," Vincent said. They stepped out into the freezing rain, leaving the warehouse and the yellow dress behind. The safe house was not a dingy basement or a fortified bunker in the outer boroughs. It was a sprawling, glass-walled penthouse on the 42nd floor of a residential tower in Tribeca. The private elevator doors slid open with a soft, expensive whisper, depositing them directly into an entryway lined with dark, polished walnut and imported slate. Tessa stepped out of the elevator, her generic black sneakers squeaking slightly on the pristine stone. The sheer scale of the wealth was disorienting. It was entirely silent, elevated, far above the sirens and the grinding noise of the city streets. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, a jagged expanse of glittering lights winking through the dissipating rain clouds. It was a beautiful cage. "Lock the car down, Dom," Vincent said, stepping past her into the cavernous living room. "I want 2 men downstairs in the lobby, 2 in the parking garage. Nobody comes up this elevator unless I clear it personally." Darian nodded, pulling a radio from his belt. "You want me to put a crew together for Sal the Butcher?" "Not yet," Vincent said, tossing the black moleskin notebook onto a massive white marble kitchen island. "We don't move until we know exactly where to hit him so it hurts the most. Keep a low profile. Let the Vitiellos panic." Darian left the elevator door, sealing him away. Vincent turned to Tessa. She was standing perfectly still in the center of the living room, looking small and entirely out of place against the backdrop of modern minimalist luxury. Her arms were wrapped around her waist, her posture defensive. "There's a guest room down the hall to the right," Vincent said, unzipping his windbreaker. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline finally leaving his system, revealing the deep, dark circles under his eyes. "Bathroom is attached. Shower. Sleep. Don't touch the windows, they're wired." Tessa didn't move immediately. She stared at the sprawling city below. "How long do I have to stay here, until I say otherwise?" "That's not an answer." Vincent stopped walking. He turned back, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The patience he had forced upon himself was wearing thin. "It's the only answer you get. You are a target, Tessa. If you walk out the front doors of this building, you will be dead before you reach the subway. You're staying." He didn't wait for a response. He walked into a side room, a study lined with dark wood shelves, and shut the heavy door behind him. Tessa was alone. The silence of the penthouse was absolute, ringing in her ears after the chaos of the night. She walked slowly down the hallway, the plush, thick carpet absorbing the sound of her footsteps. The guest bedroom was the size of her entire apartment in Queens. The bed was massive, covered in stark white, high-thread count linens. It looked completely untouched. She bypassed it, heading straight for the bathroom. The bathroom was all glass, grey, slate and chrome. The shower was a massive walk-in enclosure. Tessa turned the handle, letting the water run, until steam filled the room, fogging the large mirror. She stripped off the black clothes and stepped under the spray. The water was scalding hot. It hit her skin like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, letting it beat down on her shoulders, washing away the smell of the damp alley, the metallic tang of the warehouse, and the invisible cloying scent of Tommy's blood. For the first time since the hitman had sat down in booth, for she let herself feel it, the sheer, overwhelming terror. She leaned her forehead against the cold, wet slate wall and let out a single ragged sob. It tore out of her throat, harsh and ugly. She clamped her hand over her mouth, muffling the sound, terrified that Vincent would hear. She stood there for 10 minutes, crying silently under the burning water, mourning the simple, miserable life she had just lost forever. When she finally stepped out, her skin was flushed red. She wrapped herself in a thick white towel. She avoided looking at her reflection in the mirror. She knew what she would see, a bruised, broken thing that didn't belong in a place like this. She walked into the bedroom. A large, oversized grey t-shirt had been left on the edge of the mattress. It wasn't there before. Vincent had come in while she was showering. The thought sent a spike of anxiety through her, but she put the shirt on anyway. It smelled faintly of cedar and gun oil. His smell. She crawled into the massive bed, pulling the heavy duvet up to her chin. She expected to lie awake, her mind racing with the horrors of the night. Instead, the profound, bone-deep exhaustion dragged her under almost instantly. In the study down the hall, Vincent wasn't sleeping. He sat behind a massive oak desk, a glass of neat bourbon sitting untouched next to his right hand. The only light in the room came from a small brass desk lamp, casting a harsh, focused circle of illumination over the black moleskin notebook. He had been staring at the pages for 2 hours. Tommy Rossi was dead, but the ghost he left behind was screaming from the pages. The ledger was a masterpiece of extortion and bribery. It detailed payoffs to union bosses at the shipyard's judges in the Brooklyn municipal courts, and a high-ranking detective in the NYPD vice squad. It was a roadmap to dismantling Carmine Vitiello's power base. But as Vincent turned the pages, tracing the jagged handwriting, his mind kept drifting back to the girl sleeping down the hall. Tessa, she was an anomaly. In his world, women were either sheltered, willfully ignorant wives of made men, or they were collateral damage, bartenders, dancers, women who saw too much and disappeared. Tessa was none of those things. She was a civilian who had beaten a connected man to death with a frying pan, recognized an assassin in a diner, and successfully negotiated her life with a Mafia boss while sitting in a freezing warehouse with blood on her face. She was terrified, yes, but she wasn't paralyzed. She possessed a brutal, ragged instinct for survival that Vincent recognized perfectly, because it was the exact same instinct that had kept him alive for 34 years. He took a sip of the bourbon. The alcohol burned smoothly, a stark contrast to the cheap whiskey he had forced down her throat earlier. He knew exactly what he had to do. He had to use the book to destroy Sal the Butcher, taking a massive bite out of Vitiello's territory, and he had to keep Tessa locked away an insurance policy and a captive piece of evidence. She was an asset. Nothing more. But as he looked out the window at the city stretching out below, feeling the quiet emptiness of the penthouse, he realized the lie in his own logic. He didn't just want her here because she was useful. He wanted her here because, for the first time in his violently isolated life, he had found someone who could look at the monster he was and not look away. Tessa woke to the smell of strong coffee and roasting garlic. She bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs, the heavy duvet tangling around her legs. For a terrifying second, she thought she was back in her cramped apartment in Queens, waiting for Tommy's heavy fist to hit the door. Then her eyes focused on the floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline was bathed in the bruised orange light of late afternoon. She had slept for over 12 hours. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Her body ached. The muscles in her back and shoulders were stiff, screaming in protest as she stood up. The bruise on her face felt tight, a pulsing pressure behind her left eye. She walked out into the living room barefoot, wearing only Vincent's oversized grey t-shirt. The penthouse was alive with low, murmuring voices. Vincent was standing at the kitchen island, leaning over a sprawling, detailed map of the Bronx. Darian was next to him, tracing a line on the paper with a thick finger. Two other men, large and wearing immaculate, tailored suits, stood near the front door, their eyes scanning the room with practiced paranoia. They all stopped talking the moment Tessa walked in. The silence was heavy, oppressive. The two men by the door stared at her, their expressions entirely blank. Darian looked away, clearing his throat. Vincent looked up. He was wearing a fresh white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the intricate dark ink of a tattoo crawling up his left forearm. He looked rested, sharp, and profoundly dangerous. His eyes swept over her, taking in her bare legs, the messy knot of her hair, and the dark purple bruising on her face. "You're awake," Vincent said. His voice was calm, authoritative. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Just past 4, Vincent said. He gestured to a stool at the kitchen island. "Sit. Drink some coffee. You need to eat." There was a plate of pasta on the counter, steam rising from the red sauce. It smelled incredible. Tessa's stomach gave a loud, painful twist. She hadn't eaten since a stale bagel over 24 hours ago. She walked to the stool and sat down. She ignored the stares of the men by the door. She pulled the plate toward her and picked up a fork. She didn't wait for permission. She ate quickly, mechanically, refueling her body. Vincent watched her for a moment, a subtle shift in his expression. It wasn't pity. It was approval. He turned back to Darian. "Sal's meatpacking plant on Hunt's Point. The ledger says the drop happens on Thursdays at 6. Sal won't be there, but his lieutenant, a guy named Paulie, will be. He collects the envelopes from the local bookies and shifts them into the clean trucks." Darian nodded. "We go in hard, burn the trucks." "No," Vincent said, his voice dropping, going ice cold. "We don't fire a single shot. We don't act like thugs. We act like businessmen executing a hostile takeover." Vincent tapped a specific address on the map. "You take 4 men. You walk in the front door at exactly 5:45. You don't draw weapons unless they draw first. You tell Paulie that his boss, Sal the butcher, has been skimming from Carmine Vitiello for 2 years. You tell him we have the ledger to prove it." Darian frowned. "Is that true? Sal was stealing from Carmine. Tommy Rossi's book says he was." Vincent lied smoothly. "Or at least the numbers I extrapolated from the book look very suspicious if you hold them in the right light. You tell Paulie he has a choice. He can keep collecting for a dead man walking, or he can hand the Thursday envelopes to you, walk away, and keep his breathing privileges." Tessa stopped chewing. She swallowed hard, staring at Vincent. He wasn't just using the book to find targets. He was weaponizing the paranoia of the Mafia. He was using Tommy's records to create a fiction that would tear the Vitiello family apart from the inside. "And if Paulie doesn't buy it?" Darian asked. "Paulie is a survivor. When he hears that we have the bagman's ledger, he'll know Sal is finished. He'll hand over the money." Vincent straightened up, rolling his shoulders. "We take their revenue stream. We let Paulie run back to the Bronx and spread the rumor that Sal is a thief. By tomorrow morning, Carmine Vitiello will be questioning his own capo. They'll be too busy fighting each other to look for a missing waitress." Darian nodded slowly, a grim smile touching his lips. "It's a good play, Vince. Bloodless. For us, anyway." "Go. Call me when it's done," Vincent ordered. Darian and the 2 men left the elevator doors hissing shut behind them. The silence returned to the penthouse, thick and heavy. Vincent walked around the kitchen island. He stopped next to Tessa's stool. He didn't look at the map anymore. He looked down at her. He reached out his fingers, lightly brushing a stray strand of hair away from her bruised cheek. The touch was agonizingly gentle, entirely at odds with the ruthless orders he had just given. "You're shaking," Vincent observed quietly. Tessa looked down at her hands. The fork was trembling slightly. "You're starting a war." "I'm ending one," Vincent corrected. "Carmine has been pushing into my territory for 6 months. He thought I was weak. You handed me the knife to cut his throat." "And what happens to me when he bleeds out?" Tessa asked, looking up into his dark, fathomless eyes. "When the book is useless and you've taken the Bronx, do I get my flight to Seattle?" Vincent didn't answer immediately. He stared at her, the silence stretching out taut as piano wire. He looked at the fierce, stubborn survival in her muddy brown eyes. He looked at her, wearing his clothes, sitting in his fortress, entirely dependent on him, yet refusing to submit. "No," Vincent said softly. The word was a heavy iron door slamming shut. "You don't." Tessa's breath hitched. "You said—" "I said you'd stay where I put you." Vincent interrupted, his hand sliding to the back of her neck, his thumb resting firmly against her pulse point. He could feel her heart hammering wild and fast. He stepped closer, crowding her space, his physical presence entirely overwhelming. "The Vitiellos aren't the only threat in this city, Tessa. You know my face. You know my men. You've sat at my table and listened to me order the dismantling of a syndicate. I won't say anything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I swear." "I know you won't," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur. He leaned in his lips, inches from her ear. He smelled of dark coffee and power. "Because you are never leaving this world. You survived the alley. You survived the warehouse. Now you survive this." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. There was no pity, no apology. Only a dark, absolute possession. "You wanted to escape a street-level thug," Vincent said, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin of her neck. "Congratulations, Tessa. You did. But you traded a thug for a king. And kings don't let their pieces walk off the board." Tessa stared at him. The cold, terrifying realization settled into her bones. The waitress from Queens was dead. Tommy's blood and the rain had washed her away. What was left belonged to Vincent Corbo. The war had just begun, and she was trapped perfectly in the center of the storm. The war for New York has just begun, and Tessa is trapped right in the center. Vincent has made his move, weaponizing Tommy's ledger to destroy his rivals from the inside out. But as the Mafia boss's obsession with the tough diner waitress grows, will Tessa become a casualty of the underworld or the queen of the Corbo Empire? If you loved this deeply emotional, high-stakes Mafia drama, smash that like button and share this story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a chapter.